My next guests are David Nagel and Bruce Potter. Dave's work focuses on helping schools and districts implement visible learning research, assessment and feedback, and effective grading reform, both at school and classroom levels. He has supported schools in building impactful PLCs and is a thought leader in the PLC Plus framework. Dave has authored 7 books, 4 of which are bestsellers aligned to the PLC Plus suite of publications and contributed to publications such as Principal Leadership, Educational Leadership, and The Learning Professional. He regularly presents at national conferences. Bruce is a school administrator with over 30 years of experience. He began his career as a classroom teacher and has held leadership roles at the building level as a principal and at the district level as a superintendent for 11 years. Bruce brings a wealth of experience implementing visible learning research, guiding districts, schools, and teachers in transforming their practices. His schools have earned national recognition for innovative approaches that redefine success for traditionally underserved students. Well, welcome to the podcast, Bruce and David.
Thanks, Dana.
Yes, happy to be here.
Well, we'll start off with asking each of you the question I ask everyone. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Sure,
Bruce,
I'll
go
start.
ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So, I'm going to revert back to an experience that Dave has some familiarity with. It was a couple districts ago. It was my first superintendency. We were a district who served other people's schools. It was a public school district, but we served students who were placed there by the county court system or their committee on special education. And I remember we were just sort of struggling making gains and we needed a win. And part of what we did there was not only were we constantly working on improving in a school improvement model, improving outcomes for kids, but it was also, even though we were a public school, we needed to operate as a business because the kids down the street weren't coming there. So it was really a unique situation. And it was, I remember we were in the middle of, I will call an academic drought. Um, we weren't, the teachers were struggling. There was a variety of behavior issues going on. And what we really needed was to regroup, to refocus. And quite honestly, we all pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps, and it was just good old-fashioned strategic planning. Some dynamics had changed in the students we were servicing. Some of the There were some changes in our external environment, and we had to do a real time, in the moment restructure with some of the programs and services we were offering. It quite honestly, Dana, it would have typically in a school improvement model, it would have been a restructure over the course of a year or two.
Mhm.
Uh, we pulled this off in a couple months,
Wow.
and quite honestly, it was through what we were at the time we were calling just adult actions. What were those key few things that were working best for the folks who were, you know, on the front lines, our teachers and support staff, and quite honestly, what we were tapping into, what is now known, what John Hattie has talked about, is what works best in schools. We did less, but we went deeper with what worked. Our PLCs got stronger through real experiences, and the teachers were leaning on each other and became stronger because of it. So that's, that was probably a good 10, 11 years ago, maybe even 12, where we were in the trenches, and that's how we dug ourselves out. But it was just sort of a refocus on, this is currently not working. We do not have the time that would typically need to be to have a full-fledged restructure. And we did it grassroots,
Mhm.
organizational development style, brought the faculty in, got their voice, and made just a few key action adjustments with everyone's buy-in. So that'll be something that always sticks with me, because of the type of school we were as a public school, but we were serving other people's students who were tuition based. And if we weren't getting outcomes and the kids weren't coming, we could have closed.
Yeah, that's definitely a story of resiliency, but also success. When you realize that you need to, turn around how you operate and, get the attendance, kids to start coming. And really, how you worded that, it sounds like a lot of things were in place to make that successful. I'll have you, Dave, tell me about your time in the trenches.
Sure. I want to just say though, Dana, and I really appreciate this question in one of these kind of podcast scenarios where are being interviewed because I was actually privileged to be a part of that. And I can promise you, Bruce was telling the truth and probably um, undermined some of the leadership actions he took that literally, not just metaphorically, saved lives. Mine is similar. When back in, I started my career as a middle school teacher, and then I was a middle school administrator, and absolutely loved it. And one year, the superintendent, for reasons that I saw after, also saw in the minute, needed to make some strategic moves with some of the administrators in this large district. And the move he made with me was to send me up to the high school, which was in need of some serious, just additional support. A huge high school at about 3,400 kids. Anyway, my point I'm making is I didn't want to leave the middle school.
Yeah.
And I ended up falling in love with the position I had at Ben Davis High School. So Ben Davis High School at the time was it still is one of the largest high schools in Indiana.
Mhm.
Had about 3,400 kids, and that did not include the freshmen.
Wow.
The freshmen had their own geographically attached building, but it was a completely different building, had its own school improvement plan, and actually had its own head custodian. And if anybody who's listening to this remembers the days in Wayne Township, they'll get a kick out of that.
Mhm.
And my role was to be in charge of what was called extended day, which was a nice euphemism for night school. And
Mhm.
so I was, my hours Monday through Thursday were 2 to 10, working in kind of mainly a computer lab setting. A little bit of, we had 3 or 4 assigned teachers with some a little bit of traditional one-on-one, one-on-four for students that either met these criteria. They made a poor choice, and we needed to get them out of the day environment for a period of time. Um, they just didn't fit into a large, tremendously comprehensive high school, or they were so far behind in credits that they weren't able to keep up. So when I got there, the problem was kids were working hard and the teachers were working hard and they had to stay for a certain amount of time a day. But we'd have kids that were behind in credits that were earning 2 or 3 credits a semester. And I'm not very good at math. It doesn't
Mhm.
take mathematician, though, these kids were not going to be on track to graduate. At the same time, we had a tremendous amount of our students that were falling just short of earning a credit at the end of the semesters. And the task was always, well, then you repeat the course, which I've always said is insane. We should not just socially promote kids who haven't met standards, but I have a hard time when we say you cannot make up that test or quiz,
Yeah.
but I'll let you make up 18 weeks. So, what we did at the start of the end of the first semester was find those kids that were within either a certain percentage point or the teacher said they've actually shown acumen. They just have missed certain tasks. And I got with our main core department chairs and said, what are the main priority standards for English, math, science, social studies, and a few of the electives? And so, for example, if it was things with literature or it was things with certain language arts, what were some um, assessments, tasks that had a high level of rigor, had a high level of which showed evidence of mastery? Maybe the kid didn't do well in this task in your class and you guys read this novel. Doesn't matter. You assigned them to extended semester. Short story long, met with the parents, met with the kids, and basically kind of said if they're willing to come in a couple days a week and do this work, they have a chance to earn a credit. If they don't, you're welcome to not have them earn a credit. You're actually going to get assigned to summer school next year, and we're going to send mom and dad the bill because there was a cost. So we also try to create a little bit of an incentive. And short story long, the success both in the day program and the extended day and extended semester increased the graduation rate at Ben Davis High School 14% in 2 years.
Wow.
But I throw out something really important. We also monitored because I felt like this was important. I don't want to be putting a band-aid on something that needs stitches. And so we monitored kids who had recovered credit in the core areas. And for my 2 years in that position, and then the additional year when I was at Penn Davis, we were down to less than like 15 to 17% of kids who you earned a credit or you recovered a credit in math. 85% of them never were in credit recovery for math again. or science or English. And I think that was the big testimony. We had made sure that we weren't just handing the kid a credit. At the same time, having a kid who has a credit, we know a D isn't dandy, but doggone it, it's closer to being able to graduate is better than an F where they can't graduate.
Yeah.
But we still had it's the clock in my room that goes off every hour. So I apologize if you hear that dinging. It'll be done in a second. We drastically increased the graduation rate and I think also increased rigor and in a good way, the kind of healthy, responsible type of behaviors we want to instill in our kids.
Mhm.
I hear that a lot. Teachers need to teach responsibility. I don't disagree. I just actually never met someone with a college degree and from a certified university in teaching responsibility. I don't know
Yeah.
if that exists. So point is we can never say any one of us has the market cornered. So a lot of that those pieces actually are still in place in the work that I do. In the first grading book I wrote in 2015, specifically around secondary, and then some of the concepts that Bruce and I talk in grading visible learners. One of them is what we call make it happen, which is stands for missing essential assignments, extended chance. You're behind in skill, but it's actually these tasks that are what you need to work on to demonstrate proficiency and mastery. So when you pose that question, it took me a while to think, and I'm like, it was my time there, which I absolutely loved. And then I went into a different role as an associate principal at that high school. That's where I finished my educational kind of career in the buildings about 17 years ago. But it was something that was really profound and really got me involved in how we have to examine how we look at grades. We're not saying that 55 with my fingers is anywhere near mastery, but what does that really mean?
Hmm.
We had kids that had a lot of skill. They just had not done certain tasks and
Yeah.
assignments that maybe weren't as relevant as they needed, but we were able to earn them their credit and get them on the path to graduation.
Yeah, as well, great success story about working with those kids who you needed the credits, right? But assigning the high level of rigor and increasing that graduation rate over 2 years with 14%. So I brought you on to talk about the book that you co-wrote, which is Grading Visible Learners, published by Corwin Press. Talk to me a little bit about what elements the book addresses, some of the things about looking at evidence, how we apply it to grading. I'll let you both talk about just what you'd like to share with the audience about the book.
Sure. Bruce, I'll go ahead and jump in there first if it's okay. So I've had a vision for this for a long time. I've had the privilege of actually being certified through John Hattie's work multiple times. Initially, he was when he brought his visible learning work over to the United States, to North America, it was with a company different than Corwin. That wasn't the right fit, so he had pulled it
Right.
back. And then a few years later, he brought it over to Corwin back in 2013. And that was when I started my work with them as a professional developer. And so, in doing a lot of the visible learning work in schools over the last 10, 12 years, I saw a tremendous amount of opportunity where schools have done great work on thinking about how do we develop a good learner, not a good student, but a learner that's resilient, that takes risks, that learns from their mistakes, that perseverant, et cetera. Had teacher clarity in place, had all those fundamental core element of practices. We're using the effect size measure to determine best actions, and we're derailing it with grading and we're not having the mindset of we have to apply the effective research there. And so my vision was always to kind of take that piece and how do we align the research with what also is aligned with effective grading? And are our actions with grading promoting the behaviors we want? If we want students to take risks in their learning, if we want them to learn from their mistakes, well, then we can't count every single mistake in the grade book.
Yeah.
Should have them know it's not infinite chances where you just get to keep guessing and promote kids who are not being resilient. So
Mhm.
I've had some thoughts for a while. I'll let Bruce jump in here in a second. So how we set the text up is what do we really mean about grades being feedback? Because they really are.
Yeah.
Secondly, how we develop the most important thing as a classroom teacher is to develop students as good learners. My vehicle was physics or was biology. So I use biology to make you a good learner. And then we took the six traits of a visible learner that came from Hattie, Fisher, and Fry back in 2018. And we took those six traits and then we adapted them to make the or the acronym grades. So each chapter, starting in chapter 7, takes one of those traits, gauging your learning, being ready to take on challenges, using tools to adapt your learning, et cetera, and some high yield grading and feedback actions that are as much about feedback and assessment as they are anything else, but how it then can be brought into the grading conversation. And I've been working on it for a while, and I'll turn it over in a second to my colleague and friend Bruce, who I've known now for almost 15 years. Brought him into the project, and just totally helped it come to fruition. So I'm eternally grateful for Bruce's work with me. But Bruce, I'll let you kind of jump in there and fill in with maybe a few more details about what we placed in this book to help teachers and schools align visible learning research to grading and feedback.
Thanks, Dave. And again, grateful to have been part of the project. It has led to further um, opportunities for both of us. Honestly, Dana, I'll simply say, when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
So I jumped right in, joined the project with him probably a year and a half ago now. And the more I dug into the research, I realized, no one ever taught me how to grade when I became a classroom teacher. I graded the way I was graded and or the way my colleagues were grading. And um, I, I think I don't want to say undersell. I think the book is way more than a grading book. It's really an instructional planning process, but it's almost like a reverse engineered piece. So how do we end up scoring student work or giving them a grade? And I think, there's traditional grading, there's standards-based grading. Honestly, this is evidence-based grading. How do we know the students have learned what we wanted them to learn?
Mhm.
Well, there's a big chunk of the book, and I'm going to pick out two experiences that I had last week with a school and again yesterday with a school. And quite frankly, the book is rich with examples and anecdotes and um, contemplated, ideas and how to implement. But in all honesty, it really gets to, we've taken Hattie's evidence for each one of the characteristics and did a deep dive as to how does this best promote learning.
Mhm.
We're not, we're here to promote learning. Our jobs are to teach students. It's not to sort and select talent. And so it's to develop it. So in using that approach, and one of the um, pieces within the book that I personally have been working with schools that have been most impacted by it is using success criteria as the catalyst. So what is that? That is the outcome. And
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
creating experiences for the kids, and we call them in our book generative learning experiences that demonstrate that learning. But it's also there's a rigor component. So it's the surface, deep, and transfer. And through the book, we talk about how not all assignments are created equal, and not everything is, we pick up a concept and apply it called weighted scoring. If students are demonstrating that they can do certain things based on the success criteria, they've demonstrated they can do that. Now, the teacher will always have the last say, the final say. We're not talking about that. But if the students have demonstrated a certain amount of learning, well, then it should be in a grade range. One of our
Mhm.
core practices is teacher collaboration so that a team, a department can say, okay, we deem this to be mastery level work based on these 4, 5, 6 success criteria, whatever it may be. But it shouldn't make a difference what teacher you have as to how well a student performs, because over the course of time, I think we've all heard, well, so and so is a tough grader,
Mhm.
or we get into that type of thing. It shouldn't matter what teacher you have. Success is success.
Mhm.
So, just picking out those two things, um, you know, collaborative, teachers collaborating on scoring and but determining success ahead of time and letting success criteria really drive the decisions we make. So those are the two things that have really resonated with me as after writing the book or co-authoring it to actually work with schools of what's been their biggest takeaways and how that opens doors for them to make better instructional decisions and grading actions.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
So, well, no, I was just going to say, as Bruce alluded to it, it's Fendick and as his research in 1990 kind of brought teacher clarity to the light to into the light. And effect size is 0.85. We know the power of teacher clarity. The element that we don't think he left out intentionally, but we think needs to be in place is what Bruce said, is that clarity of scoring.
Mhm.
And one of the things that gets in the way of a lot of grading elements, grading conversation is the doggone math that we're just
Mhm.
respectfully just we think we have our arms around. And so just a point to make, because Bruce was alluding to this, but on a very simplistic level, if I was to ask somebody, what is an 84%? The average person would say, well, that's a B. And I'm like, but that's interesting because my
Mhm.
son plays, in fact, Bruce's son, both of our sons are at the same age, play college basketball. Mine that's about 6'9", if he made 85% of his dunk shots, that'd be terrible, be pathetic, respectfully. If he made 40% of his three-point shots, it'd be amazing. So that percent can't in and of itself tell us everything. So how we weigh and score and look at task rigor and surface learning, as John Hattie says, does not mean shallow learning. Surface learning is a critical element of why, as a foundational piece, as kids progress through deeper levels of problems and challenge. They need the right amount of surface to progress to the deep and to the transfer. And so, also, like Bruce mentioned, there are so many elements that we try to build into that concept. So when we're looking not just at tasks aligned to standards, and certainly standards-based grading and standards-based assessment is going to add a level of clarity if done well. I've seen more train wreck examples of that happening sometimes where we haven't thought enough about what that clarity piece means and we're not aligning tasks to it. Next, there's a difference between I cannot identify the central idea of a text as a sixth grader, or I just can't do it at the sixth grade level. And so sometimes we erroneously think in schools because teachers are overwhelmed with the amount of kids they have, the curriculum, and other demands, pausing for a second, say they actually can cite textual evidence. They're not ready to do it on the grade level text. But now I know my next learning step as a student, as a teacher, my instructional move is to increase understanding the ability to navigate the complexity of the text. That kid shouldn't be getting an A, but that kiddo should also not be getting an F and thinking that we need tier three interventions all the time. So that is another big piece that we tried to work in of how we examine grading as an extension of the rest of the work. So it helps align clarity, assessment, and feedback.
Mhm. Mhm. So I think you all have really addressed a lot of what the book talks about in terms of what teachers can use it for in their PLCs or just kind of as a as a school and thinking about how they can, look at the instructional planning process and the grading that they're doing and how to change that. You all have as well a book that's coming out in early 2026, which is Developing Collaborative Expertise. If you can tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and Dana, I apologize. One other piece that I wanted to build in before we jump there is we also talk about actions that will accidentally derail visible learners. So I'm going to stay on that topic just
Okay.
for a second. I apologize, and then those of you listening, we'll get to where we were going next with
Yeah.
collaborative expertise teams. But we talk about concepts like frustration, receiver apprehension,
Hmm.
which is when I don't know how to move forward,
Yeah.
why clarity is so important. But another one is perfectionism, which has an effect size of 0.03. So basically at zero, almost use not quite a negative game, but we're getting there. And so while it is sometimes a bigger issue grading at the secondary level, as a first grade teacher, second grade teacher, et cetera, John Hattie has talked a lot in his book, The Science of Learning with Yates. He mentioned there that one of their studies found that success in life can be attributed to how early learners feel about their teachers because they develop the schema that it's safe to make mistakes. So my little guys when they were younger and Bruce's, and we want those kiddos to love their teachers. On the flip side, we got to be cautious of over celebrating 100%.
Hmm.
Kids develop the schema of perfectionism. I love how that felt when you told me I got it perfect, and I don't want to lose that feeling.
Hmm.
Now I don't take a risk in my learning. So I at least wanted to add that nugget in there that sometimes it's about how we react and how we have a mindset of, for example, if a kid gets 100%, that literally means one thing for sure, the task was too easy.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean the kids should feel bad about themselves, but we should say, okay, now then what's your next challenge?
Yeah.
Because I promise you, if they were always getting 100% on video games, they'd quit because it was too easy. So just that element of that visible learning research, those things that are woven within. To the second question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bruce because I've kind of gone there for a second. everything that we do in our schools when we bring folks together and collaborate should be around developing and expanding upon the expertise of the teachers and educators in that school. And one of the myths is that when we're in a PLC room or on a staff, that everybody's created equal. There should be a level of competency and proficiency and general expertise of being in a school as a certified teacher educator, but not everybody's created equal. And one of the things, and I'll let Bruce kind of talk about how we put that framework together. Expertise is the thing, and John Hattie had talked about this before, that we have to look differently with our profession, similar to that of certain professions. For example, if you hire a plumber or hire a landscaper, what you pay for is the result. When my toilet is clean or fixed, when my landscaping looks good, I'll write you a check. If you have a legal issue or a medical issue, you don't pay for the result. You can't. You don't pay for a guarantee. You pay for the expertise. The more expertise increases the probability. So our whole construct was around how we make sure the expertise that's already present, we expand, and how that's our job as leaders is to help our teachers, our coaches, ourselves included as educational leaders in building the expertise through collaboration, which obviously comes in the form of PLCs, but there's also other elements that are tied to that. So, Bruce, if you don't mind kind of jumping in, talk about the collaborative expertise framework and what we're hoping to see published here in early 2026.
Absolutely. So PLCs have been around for, I don't know, for what seems like forever. I think, some of the earlier research, that Dave was involved in with his PLC Plus suite of literature, dates back into the 70s. But anytime any group of professionals has some type of interconnection, more than just a meeting where they're discussing their work, it's really a PLC, whether it's our faculty or a project team at Google, or a group of mechanics. How are they trying to solve a problem? What we have really, I'm going to say, dug down into is a three-piece model that has legs to it. So where I'm going with this is the schools have to have strategic coherence. What is it that we are, all of us, because we're the faculty here at John Q. Public School, we're going to do? And it should be based on, and it's where we've tied in visible learning evidence as well through the signature practices. Okay, well, what are those high yield things that we want to make sure, because we're running a high performing organization, we can do? We are a school. Well, things like teacher clarity, teaching with intent, feedback. What are those key essential things, um, that we want to make sure we are now going to make sure our faculty can either do them or they're not? How do we know they can do that? So we begin with strategic coherence as to what it is. Then we do it through a team, which in schools we call them PLCs. That's belonging through empowerment, because everyone, whether you're in a school or work in private industry, there needs to be a sense of belonging, ownership you're tied to a mission. We are human beings, and obviously people like to get paid and so on and so forth. But the biggest factor why people leave their employment is a lack of connection. So you have to have belonging through empowerment. And then lastly, it's the consistency of action. So the New Teacher Project had done some research similar to this. It produced some outstanding results regarding schools that really beat the odds, very similar to the visible learning evidence and outcomes. They were outperforming out of 28,000 middle school and elementary schools, um, that were low performing or not at mastery, or excuse me, whose students weren't at grade level or proficient. Just 5% of them started outperforming everyone. And what they had in common was that they had a sense of belonging, they had coherence, and they had consistency. And as we've done the research, tying it to the visible learning practices, everything John Hattie talks about, trying to get the collective teacher efficacy, is exactly what Dave led with. For everyone to get better. We're not all the same. And some of us have strengths in this or strengths in that, or we're solving certain problems that kids have. Well, what is the instructional practice that they're using? How do we know? but it's about creating systems that support this because you got to, whether it's the structural conditions that Shirley Horde has listed as one of the 6 keys to an effective PLC. How do we, people don't, faculty don't just show up and create these things. Schedules are created for them. So we've taken a holistic approach of how to develop that collaborative expertise through a model that is based on PLCs, but they're collaborative expertise teams. What are the problems we're solving? How can we raise student achievement, but not in isolation? But it has to be those few key core things that we're talking about. It's teacher clarity. It's a solid curriculum. What schools and districts, profess, but it's the system and structure, and we have our 9 frames for it. We have the 3-piece model that we dive into, but then we get into 9 frames. It's the relevance to role. Sometimes people don't even know why they're at the meeting. They'll be sitting at a table and why am I here? So we always talk about, okay, what's the intention, rationale, and success criteria for this meeting? If it's good for the kids, it's good for the adults. Because I have heard nowhere a teacher say, I have extra time. In addition to that, it's tier 1 professional development. Everyone's going to be trained and supported in concepts like teacher clarity. Whatever you're putting your stake, your flag in the ground as is we are this school, then how do we know that all the faculty can do it? We call that tier 1 professional development. And then it's about creating teams of significant impact because it's not always, well, we're just the 3rd grade team or we're the math department. What is the problem we're trying to solve? How do we create structures so that we can have different types of folks sitting at the table depending on what they do? Well, that should depend on what problem we're trying to solve. And then again, it gets to the heart of what PLCs have been, whether it's the PLC Plus model through Corwin or the solution tree model that the DuForest created. There's got to be deep inquiry through guided questions. But then one of the things that Dave discovered as we were diving into this is the concept of cognitive diversity. It's one thing to actually have folks that are of different generations or different backgrounds. That's diversity. But more importantly, we're there to solve problems. It's the diversity in how you think. So as an example, you may not be able to recreate all your PLC teams, but if you know and have an understand of how your folks are thinking, there may not be an analytical thinker in that team of 5 or 6 teachers. Well, then they're going to need some support when it comes to analyzing the data. So, but to be thoughtful about how we set this up. And then quite honestly, I've learned more from my failures than I have my successes. We can't rush any of this. There has to be psychological safety and relational trust within the school environment. By have a shared language of learning and understanding what terms mean and what does it look like, sound like, and feel like in action, like professionalism and trust and communication and feedback. We can't just assume. So we then dive into authentic norms and commitments for these meetings. Like, what are our preparation norms? I'm just a colleague of somebody else's, and I'm sharing material. I'm asking them to come prepared to work. But if we don't have that norm or commitment down that we are going to have agendas out in advance, we're going to review test data or read an article about an instructional strategy in advance, then we're not moving the work forward and we're just wasting more time, which then comes into team leadership and cohesion. There has to be some activation at the meeting as to how we're working. So that's the framework we've come up with. It's a holistic approach because far too often people are overworked, they're overwhelmed, and this meeting becomes a burden. And they would have been much better off not attending. We can really, it's a wonderful thing that can leverage student achievement, but that's why we believe this is such an important thing to help with.
Well, thanks
Yeah.
both of you. Go ahead.
Sorry, just to take to a couple just points that Bruce mentioned as he kind of talked about the framework, but not getting into the deep minutia. For example, when he talked about norms, that's one of the most misunderstood things in schools. It's no disrespect to teachers because they'll say, our norms were on time, prepared, respectful, and all voices will be heard. None of those things ever move the needle. You should be respectful. You should be on time because when my kid's not, you tell me. So, but like Bruce alluded, there's preparation norms. Those are things that happened before. There's communication. This is how we make sure that we interact with each other. There's learning norms. So when we are going to look at evidence or we're going to analyze an assignment, there's directions for our behavior that we agree upon. What we don't do is just placate and just speak to the 7 or 8 possible things we hope everybody behaves for. It's much deeper than that. And then just for a moment to speak to, because Bruce alluded to it, we created a lot of solid instruments that schools can use to say what is our level of readiness next step. And when he mentioned the point about cognitive diversity, we all have thinking processes. And it's really unrelated to our age, demographics, any of that. So we might find that this team is very strong in analytical thinking, not a lot of creativity. Okay, well, that might be why they get stuck to come up with new ideas after they look at their evidence and data. Or on the flip side, they're not strong in analytics. Well, that doesn't mean they don't have to look at their data, but maybe we provide some support or we don't assume that every team's going to perform the same degree of task completion, performance, and proficiency just because they're all degreed professionals. And when Bruce mentioned the relevance, when we support any educator, but I think especially in 2025, 26, and moving forward, where a lot of not just burdens have been put on them, so much has changed, even new teachers coming out from when they were in school with AI, just how students interact with material, to arm them with this team needs to be moving the learning forward. And so the framework we hope provides, regardless of any PLC model. I'm obviously, as a PLC Plus author and thought leader on that, I believe a lot in it. I've seen PLC Plus implemented that did not move the lead needle, and Rick DeFore's model that did. So it can't be the model. So we created examples throughout. Hey, this would align to PLC Plus question 2, or this would align to achievement teams question 3, one of our colleagues, Steve Ventura. So regardless of what your PLC approach is, or maybe you don't, you haven't espoused to any, we've got some places where here's a structure to put in place, but it is not aligned to any, and not that we're saying it's perfect. We think it's aligned to every. And it could be a user manual for administrators, coaches, team leaders, even classroom teachers as well, and PLC teams for how to guide their learning and develop expertise through how we collaborate.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and you have sent me a file. I'll insert that in the show notes that'll explain that a little bit more. I wanted to ask you all about some events where you'll be speaking. You told me both Learning Forward and there's some grading institutes as well as Best Practices Conference in Texas.
Sure. I'll get kicked off and then Bruce jump in. So we're always excited. I think Learning Forward, outside of the annual Visible Learning Institute, I'm a little biased, is the premier education event of the year. And getting into Learning Forward is challenging because they put so much of their beliefs and practice into that event. I've never been to a Learning Forward event where people said the sessions weren't very good because you have to work hard to put a session together. And you have to say, what's your intention? What's your instructional plan? I just love when organizations model and what they espouse. So we'll be there on Wednesday morning, talking about grading visible learners. And then we have a few, we haven't earmarked the dates, but we're going to look at one in Ohio, one in Westchester, New York, and definitely one in Des Moines, a grading what we call boot camp, where some will be one day, some are 2 days that are not just as we've talked about grading practices, obviously a part of it, but a lot of those elements around quality assessment and feedback aligned to grading visible learners. And then Bruce, go ahead and talk to us about February in Texas.
Yeah, that's a nice opportunity. National Best Practice Conference that is in Texas. We're going to be, digging into the components of our new book, how to organize for teams of significant impact to build that collaborative expertise.
Great. I will be putting links to those events in the show notes so people can see your talks there and perhaps sign up for anything in the future. Out of everything we talked about on the podcast today, I'd like to ask both of you, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I'm just going to say, when we know better, we do better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm going to steal a line from one of my most esteemed colleagues because in our profession, when you steal something, they call it research. But John
Uh-huh.
Almaroy I think is one of the most brilliant human beings on earth. And the only thing that is bigger than John's brilliance and expertise is his humility. Author on a lot of visible learning works and just a phenomenal educator, phenomenal person. Too much, too fast, it won't last.
Hmm.
That applies to 5-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and 50-year-olds. So how we view learning as we should, with a very intentional lesson design around certain key elements aligned to clarity. And hey, I'm going to go through this next part real fast so I can say I covered it. It doesn't work in PD. It doesn't work in a fourth grade or eighth grade classroom either. So too much, too fast, not going to last.
And where can people find you all online?
Well, several places. One, our website, the Center for Collaborative Expertise, or the number 4 expertise, both of those.com. Bruce and I are also on LinkedIn. We have pages there. And we often just get folks reaching out to us through not only our website, but also in the book, there's our information as well. So, Bruce, any places I'm missing?
No, I think you've covered it all.
Right. I'll make sure I insert those in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today, talking about your book that has been published and the upcoming book. And people can reach out to you if they'd like to learn more. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much,
Thanks
Dan.
for having us.